Greetings folks and welcome to the Electromaker Show. This is your roundup of all things maker and embedded and lovely, and we are back after a short break with a lot of exciting things. A lot of exciting things have happened since we've been off air, and I'm going to be playing catch up a little bit. There is a new chip in town which is a really interesting one. It is the SG2002, a chip that combines RISC-V and ARM with a separate RISC-V core and, interestingly, an 8051 MCU for peripherals. And there's now dev boards for it. We'll be talking about that. We'll also be announcing the winner of our Zimablade competition, talking about our product of the week, which is the microbit version 2, looking at some things on funding websites, and also a wonderful build of a $20 synthesizer that you can build with very simple to get parts. So with all of that to get through, let's get on with this week's show. We're going to start this week's show with a project on the Electromaker website, but this one's actually quite special to us because this is a project from Ralph J.Y. And Ralph was the person who won the Firebeetle 2, which was a competition that we had a couple of weeks ago. It is an ESP32 based development board with a couple of nice things on it, including this display socket, which as you can see has been paired here with a mini touchscreen. And Ralph has made a fully self-contained battery-powered gas sensor, which has a node red front end in order to see the gas readings at any given time. And it's just a really nice thing, because one of the things I've said over and over while we've been doing these competitions is I love the fact that we get to give this hardware away to people, but what I'd love to see the most is what you do with it. And so for me, this is a very special moment. And it is a lovely project as well. So I urge you to go and read the wonderful documentation of it yourself. I don't have time to go through it in absolute detail right now, but I'll give you the cliff notes. So, as previously mentioned, ESP32 based development board, touchscreen, and a multi-channel gas sensor from Seed Studio with a Grove connector. This project also has an in-house battery because this Firebeetle 2 supports battery charging. It has a battery manager on board. And Ralph also created a nice 3D printed case for it. We'll get to the code and firmware and all that kind of stuff in a moment. Yeah, there's a 3D printed case here, and you can sort of see how this all fits together. The screen will go on top of the case here and fit in it so you can see the screen. And there's a breakout here for the Grove connector for the gas sensor, because ideally you want your gas sensor to be out in the open and pick up, well, gas. And here you're seeing the case closed. It's still on USB power as it stands right now. And this sensor is actually a temperature and humidity sensor that Ralph was using for testing. He's got experience with this particular module. It allows him to test everything else. Is the ESP32 board working the way he wants it to? Is the screen working the way he wants it to? And the hardware coding was done using the Arduino IDE. You can add this to your boards manager in order to get ESP32 dev board support. And as you can see, the Firebeetle 2 is supported here. And further down in, here, you can see all of the example code. There's a GitHub library for the multi-channel gas sensor that he used. And there's a wiki for it as well, just here. So if you're interested in finding out more, you can find those from this link. I'll link the main project in the description. And here you can see it working by itself on battery power, just a completely standalone gas sensor. And this is the hardware side of the project. And this alone would be a really fun DIY gas sensing project with some real utility. You could, for example, add a buzzer and set it up there. If there were any massive changes in any of the gas sensor readings within a very short amount of time, it would start beeping, because presumably you'd want to know about that. So on top of the hardware side of things, Ralph decided to turn it into an MQTT device on his local network using Node-RED. And Node-RED, as the name suggests, is node-based logic for taking data from one place and putting it somewhere else, including visualization on the dashboard. So you're seeing here the temperature and humidity and pressure from the initial tests that Ralph did. I don't know if I mentioned this or not. Before putting the gas sensor in, he tested it with a temperature and humidity sensor that he had previous experience with, just to test the hardware run-up. But if you look further down, you can see the Node-RED flow for the gas sensor, and here's all of the different gas sensing too. It's just really nice to see such a complete idea for a project carried out, again, by something that was one of the competition winners, because I always say how much I would love to see the things that people make with them, and here's actual evidence that one of the things that we put out there into the world has been put into someone's home project. And yeah, I really look forward to see where this goes next. I know that from reading the project you have a little bit more tinkering you want to do with this, Ralph, and thank you so much for putting it up on the website and giving me something so wonderful to open this week's show with. Just quickly before moving on, if you do want to support us, a great way you can do that is by shopping at our store, and all of the bits from this project are available in the Electromaker store, including the Firebeetle itself. Also, if you'd like to find out more about the Firebeetle, I did talk about it a few shows ago, but there's a blog for the Firebeetle 2, our product of the week that Robin does, including a video going through everything that's good about it, and of course a link to where you can get one in our shop. And I should add a link to Ralph's project to it as well, because this is a wonderful thing that you could make with it. Now, up next, we're going to be talking about a $20 synthesizer that you can build using a STM32 black pill and a very cheap I2S DAC and a few other components. It has MIDI input and it sounds absolutely wonderful, and it's called the BP Synth and it's by Synthetech. Now, I'm very surprised I didn't talk about this when it first appeared on the internet, because I've been following Synthetech for a while. Not only is the BP Synth one of their creations, their channel has got a huge amount of educational content on it too, as to how you can get started with digital audio, how you can start with MIDI, and a lot of things that I am very interested in. I've made no secret of the fact that in my spare time, I am very slowly working on a fully digital synthesizer, which uses, well, I haven't really settled on the hardware I'm going to use for it either so far. I've been mostly trying to learn how to make synthesizers that don't sound horrible in code, and it's a slow process for me, but Synthetech is one of the many YouTube channels that I find very useful. The reason I'm talking about it again now is because Floyd Steinberg, another very interesting YouTube channel who covers a lot of crossover DIY and just normal kind of music tech stuff, has just put up a video about the BP Synth, which is a wonderful introduction to it and a wonderful tutorial to it as well. So before we go any further, I want to give you a couple of quick examples of the sound. One from Synthetech, the person who created it in the first place, and one from Floyd. Now, I probably had to cut both of those down quite small for timing, and both channels make it very clear that these are just demo sounds from the board, not necessarily supposed to be fully put together tracks. But even from those alone, you can hear that this has a real depth of sound to it, and it really does bring to mind the kind of analog sounding things that you would expect from an analog sounding synthesizer. The DSP side of it has been wonderfully put together, and Synthetech has done a wonderful job of that. What Floyd brings to the table, as he always does, is a very clear and easy to follow video for anyone who just wants to get this thing up and running, who maybe is at the more of the start of their journey, whereas Synthetech is someone who has done the hardware side of things, done the software side of things, and is deeply in the weeds and knows how this all works. This is a video for someone who just wants to build their own synthesizer and follow a nice step-by-step guide, and Floyd tells you absolutely everything you need to know, including how to solder it, tips and tricks for getting it right, and doesn't go into the depths of exactly what every single thing does, which for some people might be terrible. You might want to hear every single gruesome detail, but for some people they just want to build their own synthesizer and get going with it. Because of course, once you've done that, you have the firmware to put on the synthesizer. You can then choose to try and update that firmware or completely replace it, because ultimately this is just a microcontroller with a DAC and a MIDI input, and you can slowly, piece by piece, learn how to make something of your own using that. And there is something incredibly satisfying just seeing a breadboard in front of you, whether it's an analog synthesizer with analog parts or a digital synthesizer like this, and then having something coming out of it that sounds like it comes out of a very fancy boxed synth that you spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars or pounds or euros on. Whereas, as I mentioned before, this thing costs $20 in parts to build, and Floyd notes down everywhere that you can get them. By the way, just to note, I will just be linking Floyd's video on here, but I highly, highly recommend that you go down and click the very first link in the comment section here to Blaine's YouTube channel, because yeah, there's just a wealth of stuff on here. I can't remember if it was Blaine or someone else who I turned to when I was looking for MIDI integration for my desktop synthesizer. I've been using Port Audio to just get my head around DSP without having to have hardware with me, because it runs on every computer I have. Yeah, learning how to parse MIDI signals completely independently, learning how it works is kind of a complicated thing if you're still getting your head around bitwise manipulation, even, for example. And Blaine explains things wonderfully in a great amount of depth. But if you're looking for a video that gets a synth up and running nice and quick, Floyd has done it once again, and I will leave a link to it in the description. Now, on our last show, we started a contest to win one of these, a Zimablade. This is an x86 single board computer with upgradable RAM and a bunch of nice ways of plugging peripherals in, PCI slot on the side here. People who entered that competition have been waiting patiently to find out who won it, and it is now time to announce that. Just before we do, however, there is a full blog post on the Product of the Week blog that came out back then. If this is the first time you're hearing about the Zimablade and you would like to find out more, Robin, our in-house gadget guru and engineer, has done a fantastic rundown of everything that you could do with the Zimablade, and there's a bunch of wonderful projects out there too. There'll be a link to this in the description of the video. But now, let's get on to who won. And our winner is David Sherrick8633. And the comment read, with the hashtag Zimablade, which is how we pick them, by the way, at random. Similar to the Rover project you mentioned, I am working on a prototyping system for letting a blind child drive a toy electric car in their yard. This is an interesting alternative to the Raspberry Pi. It's also a very interesting idea for a project. It's unique. I've never really heard anything quite like it. When you do get that up and running and start documenting it, please do stick it up on the Electromaker site. I would love to talk about it in the show. But for now, congratulations, David. We'll be in touch with you as to how we can get this board out to you. But this competition is one of only many we are running, which means it is time for us to talk about our current product of the week. Yes, our product of the week this week is the Microbit version 2. Now, this is a board that's been out for quite some time. I was excited about it when it first came out, and I reported on it as a journalist back then, and I'm still excited about it now, because the Microbit, and especially the version 2 of it, is very unique in the way that it approaches its hardware and the way that that hardware can be used by other people. Because the hardware on it is industry standard. It's a Nordic Bluetooth Low Energy chip, the NRF52833. And the NRF52 series is found in a bunch of consumer items. There's a reason why Nordic Semiconductor are one of the industry standards for this. And using their hardware can be quite difficult for beginners. However, the Microbit has been built from the ground up to be easy to use in a variety of ways. So from a hardware standpoint, there's a lot of things on here to like. There's the LED matrix, which allows you to do anything that you can do with an LED matrix, scrolling text, or you can use it as a very minimal display. But it also has a bunch of sensors on it. It has an accelerometer, compass, a temperature sensor. There's a microphone on it as well, I believe, and an onboard speaker as well. I didn't actually know it had an onboard speaker. I must have missed that. But here's the part where I get really excited. It's a Bluetooth Low Energy chip, and the firmware that they've put on it allows people to use block-based coding on a tablet or a smartphone, and then send that to the Microbit via over-the-air updates. So really, as long as you can power the board up and you have some kind of a tablet, which is far more likely than people having a laptop, or even a laptop that you can plug things into these days. That seems to be a resource that is becoming less and less easy to do. I have a MacBook downstairs, and I'm always messing with adapters. It's annoying. But the fact that on the one side, you can use a tablet to program this and use block-based programming just by using MakeCode and just dragging logic into a place. But on the other hand, this is a Nordic Semiconductor chip. It is fully supported by the Zephyr project. So you could set up a Zephyr project for this and run a full real-time operating system and use this dev board as the basis of your development for something a lot more hardcore. As I've talked about many times in the past, I have been slowly getting my head around Zephyr for months, and I feel like I've barely scratched the surface still. Now, as always, I've waxed lyrical about things that I have picked up over time, but this isn't really a deep dive. If you want that, head to this blog article, head to the wonderful video that Robin and the team have made. A lot of effort goes into making these, and they're always a wonderful full picture of what a thing is and why you might want to get one. And of course, if you would like to buy one, we have them on sale in the Electromaker store. However, there is an opportunity to get one for free, because like every product of the week that we have here on Electromaker, we're going to give one away. Now, for those of you that are new to competitions here on the Electromaker channel, it's very easy to enter, and we make it as fair as we can. All you need to do is be subscribed to this YouTube channel and then leave a comment on this video saying what you would make if you did get the Microbit. But that's just something that we're interested in hearing. We pick our winners always at random, and to win this one, it is Microbit V2 is the hashtag you need to use. No spaces, no colons, nothing. Hashtag Microbit V2. You should see it just here on the screen is the way to write it. And I just search those hashtags, and then they go into a random number generator. I'd love to come up with a big fancy machine that does that when I have the time, but for now it's Microsoft Excel. That's how we pick our random winners. But yes, every time that we give something away, it is completely at random, but I do want you to leave a comment saying what you would make with it, because that's one of the things I love the most about these contests. We'll be announcing the winner for that on the next show. Good luck. Up next, we have a section called Funding Website Things, where we look at things on funding websites. And while we do look at things on Kickstarter and Indiegogo and all of those from time to time, Crowd Supply is where we find ourselves the most, because it's a website that's basically built for our interests, and is a funding website. Funding Website Things is the name of the section. But yeah, it's very rare that I'll check any other website other than Crowd Supply if I'm looking for new crowdfunding things, because there's just been such a massive amount of wonderful stuff show up on here. And if you go by browse and look at the pre-launch stuff, which is where I find out about a lot of new things before they're even really available, you'll find there's a whole wealth of different ideas here. If you're into software-defined radios, they're very well highly represented on Crowd Supply. There's a bunch of things here I'm going to have to feature in future shows because they just look really interesting. Like this, the silent electroluminescent light engine engine designed for wearables. This is something that we're going to be coming on to. I almost put it in this week's show, but there was something else that caught my eye instead. And that is the AgileWhisker keyboard. Now, we don't cover mechanical keyboards on the show all that much, but as you can see from this image, this is not your average keyboard. Now, this is, of course, a digital representation of what it will look like, but there's a number of things here that I found particularly interesting. The first is just the setup for this. You have this keyboard, and then you have this chain coming out of it, which allows you to add myriad different controls. You can see here, I don't know if that's a light sensor, but here's a potentiometer. This is a distance sensor, maybe some kind of audio thing. They look like they could be microphones. The potentiometer here, or maybe that's a radial dial. There's a bunch of different things you can attach to it, and you can chain them. So the hardware side of it looks really interesting to begin with anyway. And they have a full launch video on it that basically says exactly what you'd expect. It's a keyboard, but it's more than a keyboard. So it is a fully programmable keyboard, as you may expect, but it also incorporates various ways to program JackDAC modules. Now, JackDAC modules are things that are created by KittenBot, who are the creators of this keyboard. And they look really interesting. They primarily use DeviceScript, which is TypeScript for IoT. Now, I am way out of my comfort zone here because TypeScript is a subset of JavaScript, and apart from a little bit of messing with the web audio API to try and make synthesizers in the browser, I don't really know anything about TypeScript. But from what I understand and from looking at DeviceScript on Microsoft GitHub page and also the JackDAC page itself, seems really quick to get off the ground with. And in fact, weirdly enough, their demo uses the microbit version 2, as mentioned earlier in this very show, and shows how easy it is to get started with JackDAC and the microbit adapter. And you're seeing here the in-browser, or in-app, I think in this case, simulator, which is actually showing exactly what's happening and reflecting what's happening with the hardware on the other side. So here's another example of it. The slider's moving up and down, and you can see that here. Also of note is that you don't have to just use TypeScript or JavaScript. There's a .NET version, which is in beta, and a Python version, which is in beta, and interestingly, make code. So you can do visual programming with the JackDAC modules as well. So these are, again, all from KittenBot, and they've put out a bunch of different modules that can attach. And all of these things will also be compatible with the AgileWhisker keyboard. So it's a really interesting concept. I like this idea of having a keyboard that you can extend. And of course, this isn't anything necessarily new. We've had kind of custom macro pads that you can extend in your own ways however you like, but this is a very clean approach, and it does seem like there's a lot of different ways you could approach There does seem that there's a lot of different ways that you could approach programming it or using it, and it is one of those weird things that blends utility with learning. You could use this as your development kit, but you could just use it as something to add some utility to your day. Like, for example, one of the things that showed somewhere on here is using the distance sensors to move from screen to screen, for example, I think was one of the things they showed. Yeah, okay, using two separate distance sensors, maybe not the most efficient way of setting up a gesture sensor, but of course, this is just one of many things you could do with it. They have their little mailbox here as well. Anyway, this is pre-launch. There's no price for it or anything yet, although there are many JackDAC modules already available from KittenBot. If you would like to find out more about it, head to the link in the description. There's a link out here to the JackDAC GitHub page that tells you about all of the different parts. And of course, you can find out more about KittenBot at the bottom of the project here with all of their socials and their website and all that kind of stuff. And interestingly, they are also putting together a numeric keypad that you could use as a macro pad, as I previously mentioned. Very similar kind of idea. Now, while we've been off air, a quite interesting new system on chip appeared. I'm going to be talking about the LicheeRV Nano, which is the development board that it encompasses, but I'm opening this first link here just quickly first to talk about the chip itself. So it's called the SoftGo SG2000 or SG2002. As it mentions here, it combines a bunch of really interesting things. So new SoCs featuring a bunch of, that's where I got that word from, a bunch of RISC-V and ARM cores capable of running Linux, Android, and FreeRTOS simultaneously. And to maximize the fun, an 8051 MCU core is also in the mix, along with 0.5 TOPS for the SG2000 or 1 TOPS SG2002 AI accelerator. This is everything in one chip. This is a wild idea, and it's not a particularly expensive chip either. Now, I'm going to jump over to this article, and this is the one I will link in the description, because this is a development board featuring this hardware that you can get now. Straight away, let me just say, despite what I just said about this being an insane chip with everything on it, these boards are just between $890 and $1390 plus shipping, and they incorporate a huge amount of potential. So you're seeing various different versions of it here. They have the general board with the footprint that you can attach things onto. So here we have an Ethernet attached to it, here we have a camera attached to it. Presumably, this is because you can attach attach a micro SD port to it as well. It has a camera socket as well, you can see here. Maybe this is some kind of Wi-Fi or long-range port, I'm not really sure. The point is there's a lot of different ways that you can work with this. So a very quick jump through the specs. The system on chip, as mentioned, it has a 64-bit RISC core or an ARM Cortex-A53. You can choose between the two of them. It has a second core, which is a 700 megahertz 64-bit RISC-V core, which is still by itself almost as powerful as a Teensy 4, right? I mean, the minor core here is still incredibly powerful, and this is a development board that's going to cost you between $8 and $13. And then it has the 8051 core, which I'm assuming is just for peripherals, and it's such an interesting thing to see it on a modern chip, because the 8051 is ancient, right? Anyway, I don't really know much more to say about this because I haven't had any hands-on experience with it, and it's a completely new chip. It will run Linux, although you can run an RTOS on it, or you can run Linux and an RTOS simultaneously, and it's something that I'm really looking forward to seeing projects appear using, because there are a few different versions of this, notably Milk 5. I was looking this up earlier, so I still have the tab open. Milk 5, who made the Duo, which is a board that we've talked about. We talked about a lot of the Milk 5 RISC-V boards when they first came out, they made that little Arduino Nano version of a RISC-V board, which was as cheap, not an Arduino Nano, which was a Raspberry Pi form factor. It looked like the Pi Pico, but had a RISC-V chip on it and was as cheap as one. They also have a version of this board with a bunch of peripherals already attached on it, starting from $9.09. I'm assuming that means $9.90. Which is, just an incredible chip that has a bunch of different things that it can do. I'm sort of lost for words because it's not that you could use it for one thing, it's that I'm struggling to think of something you couldn't use this for. I mean, the alternative to this is a fully fledged single board computer like the Raspberry Pi, but that's a fully fledged single board computer. This combines everything and seems to do a lot rather well. But again, I really would like to see projects with it before I go into that, and I'm looking forward to talking about projects that feature this on the show. But for now, if you are interested in finding out more, I will leave a link to this in the description of the video. You can find links to AliExpress in the bottom of the article, and there's various versions of it available. Ethernet only, Wi-Fi only, Ethernet and Wi-Fi, or just bare board with none of that on. And of course, I'm assuming the bare board will be the cheapest. And if you do end up getting one and having a go at getting it up and running, or any board that has this new system on chip on it, please do let me know. It's very interesting. I have ordered a cheap development board, which I believe was the LicheeRV. When I first saw this, the first thing I did was find the cheapest development board I could for it and just get one so that I could try and get my head around it somewhat, but it hasn't arrived yet. But yeah, what an interesting thing to even exist. All of these things on one board with the option of having, two quite powerful RISC-V cores, or an ARM core and a RISC-V core, and that 8051 MCU core for peripherals. Such an interesting idea. Finally this week, and very briefly because I'll be talking about it more in the coming weeks, Hardware Pioneers 2024 is available for registration. You can register to attend. So if you're in the UK, it's something certainly worth thinking about. It's in London, and it is a 2-day event which is full of all of the embedded tech that you would want to see. And in fact, if you'd like to get a taste of it, I'll leave a link to the Hardware Pioneers website in the description. This is where you can register. But I'll also leave a link to all the blogs that we've done featuring Hardware Pioneers, because Robin was there interviewing people and looking at everything that's on show. And there's a huge amount of really interesting stuff. Robin has done some fantastic interviews with the people behind the tech on show, from quite large companies to smaller companies as well. And so if you would like to find out more about that, head to the links in the description. And as I say, it's just a short one for today. We'll go into a bit more detail in the coming weeks. That was our show for this week. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for your continued support. If you would like to support the show financially, as I mentioned during the show, we have a store you can find at electromaker.io. If you're planning a project or planning on buying a gift, or you need 10,000 of something for your job, please get in touch with our sales reps. They'll be able to help you, and it does directly support us. Outside of that, if you want to join our community on Discord, there's a link to that in the show notes just below. And if there's anything you'd like to see more of on this show, please do let me know. I'm aware of the fact that I tend to just pick things that really jump out to me, and I have a lot of creative control to do that. But if you would like to see more things to do with, say, 3D printers, or beginner level projects, or the really cutting edge new side of things, if there's one side of things that really appeals to you, crowdfunding is another one, do let me know in the comments, and I can start trying to add things like that in slightly greater doses. But if not, of course, I'll be happy to keep just turning up the things that I find exciting. Anyway, with all that said, I hope you're having a fun, safe and creative week, and I'll see you next time.